Hi out there in the YouTube and welcome back to my channel. In this video I wanted to share some of my favorite books that I currently have with me. So this isn't my entire collection of my favorites, but it is some of them and I wanted to share them with you. I know that a lot of insight and knowledge and growth in our perception of the world can really be attained through reading and literature, because it can really help to gain perspectives from other people's viewpoints. And if we learn to encompass those views in our own, then we can really expand our awareness and consciousness. So, where to begin? I have quite a few I want to share. I'm just going to go through them quickly and just say why I like them. And if you want to look them up, feel free to do so. Okay, so the Nakshatras, this first one. It's by Prash Triviti. Highly recommend anything that this guy has written. Didn't have it with me. There's another book. There's another book that Prash wrote, and it's called the Ketu Rahu Experience. The Rahu Ketu Experience. A little dyslexic there. But one thing with Western astrology, with the 12 signs of the zodiac, is that it doesn't really go into as much detail. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with the Western system. I just find that in a lot of the books that have writing about each sign, they don't really offer as much guidance. Yeah, they might be like, Taurus is stubborn and likes material stuff and is very sensual. How is that going to help somebody? I mean, if you just tell them that, that's not really, you know, telling a thistle that they're pointy is really just pointing out the obvious. It's not really giving them advice on how to, not hurt people with their thistles, right? And I find the Vedas do a really good job at that. So, anything by Prashtraviti, these two books are super amazing. Highly recommend either one of them. And then going a little more Western old school, is this book on your rising sign. And basically your rising sign is so useful because if you know your rising sign, then you know your first house. And if you know your first house, then you know all the other house placements. So when you know your rising, you really do know a lot more about the person's house placements. So areas in their life in which the planetary placements will affect their life. You can actually really narrow that down by knowing the ascendant. Then there's a book on Saturn signs. And this book is really useful. The placement of Saturn really can show you struggles, trials, tribulations, and difficulties that you might encounter in your life. This book goes through the house placements, the sign placements, and also if there are conjunctions with Saturn. So really recommend this book as well. Sorry, it might seem a little scattered in the types because I'm just picking them off my bed, and then once I've gone through them, then they go to the floor. So I'm going to go through the ones that I had picked out. I have a whole bookshelf over there, but these are just the favorite ones that I wanted to share. Then the 27 Stars, 27 Gods. This one's by Victor Kara. He has a YouTube channel, which I'd highly recommend to check out. If you're thinking about getting the book, look at some of his work that he has produced, and I think he's very knowledgeable in the field of astrology, and has not only done lots of scriptural research, but self-reflection, meditation on the signs and the placements. So he does seem to have a very sound and profound spiritual outlook on the nakshatras. This book goes kind of more through texts and scriptures and quotes from the Bhagavad Gita and ancient Vedic texts that correlate to your sign. So it might talk about Kritika or Bharani or any of the sign placements for the nakshatras. It's really useful. And then I actually have two that I already kind of showed this one, but if it looks familiar. But this one I didn't actually show already. I showed this one. But I like this guy so much that I bought a copy of each one because these are actually different editions. Like he wrote them at different times. One of them's a little thicker. I think he did add some notes and lengthened some of the sections, but for the most part it is pretty much the same book. So either one of these I'd highly recommend. But the this one is the newer one, the Comprehensive Treatise. The other one just says The Real Secrets. So there is a difference. But they're both by Prashraviti and they're amazing books. Okay, and then we're going a little bit more Western, but still ancient. So this Astronomica by Marcus Manilius. This one isn't so much for if you want to study with each of the zodiacs for the 12 sign placements. If you want to study their qualities and know about like deciphering a chart, this book isn't really so much for you. But if you are new to astrology and you don't really want to master reading charts, but you just want to like dive into it, this is written around zero, so like about 2017 years ago, really long time ago, and it's written by someone who lived in one of the royal castles, and it really shows the perspective. It was originally written in Latin, but it was translated. The version I have actually shows, if I can find where it's got a good example, it shows the Latin on one side and the English translation on the other. So I really like that it has like the original text. We hope, right? Like fingers crossed. Like things always do get lost in time through scripture translation, but it does do a really good job at describing how like the royal families and the kings and queens used astrologers, and they were really kind of greedy. Like they didn't want common people to have access to that knowledge, and the commoners and peasant people didn't know about it. Like it was really only like the royal elite and the elect that had an understanding of astrological principles. So it's really important because I think a lot of things have shifted. Like nowadays, people think that astrology is like, hey, woohoo, and it's been disproven and all that by scientists, but they still use it, and that's just a whitewash because they don't want people to actually have access to this. But that's what in this video I'm trying to share all the ones that I think are really good. So highly recommend this one. I'm just showing you that way, like if you look it up, this edition is my favorite. It's kind of handheld, not really pocket size, but it's not like a giant textbook to have to carry around, and it encompasses a lot of information. Like it talks about each of the sign placements, but not in it's in old-fashioned tongue. So I say it's not very good for people who are new or like wanting to learn about astrology with like reading a chart. But if you're new to the concepts, it's very poetic. It has very good imaginative tools that like describe the sky and its spiritual transcendence and the swirls of the angelic voices of the heavens. It's very descriptive and poetic, and if you have a good imagination, can visualize some of the stuff that it describes, it's like mind-blowing. So this one's top of my list pretty much. This one is a little bit more basic. Um, and you can probably even just tell by the cover that it's a little bit more there's no ancient text in but the author or Collins, this book series, these people, they're very good, and this book is laid out very pretty, and it has like good pictures, and it has love matches and talks about compatibility between each sign, goes through if it's your sun or your moon, different placements. It doesn't really go into all the details. Well, actually, it doesn't really go into sun and moon, sorry. It's just like details on each sign. But if you know what the planets are about, you can like incorporate them on your own merit And this book still does a really good job at summarizing the 12 and their character natures. So, highly recommend this one too. And then for people who are a little more deep into the astrology, wanting to study it, this one is really, really good. It's Julius Firmicus Maternus, and Ancient Astrology, Theory and Practice. This is what it looked like. Trying to give you, hopefully that's not too glared and reflective, but this book is really good to have as like a study guide, but it is also written in like old tongue, so some of the concepts might be a little bit culturally hard to understand. But if you could be unbiased and just kind of like take mental notes about what the energies in each sign is kind of like, they do a good job at describing that. So this is one of more of the kind of ancient books. It wasn't from like, I'm trying to remember the date. Oh yeah. So it's almost as old as the other one. Some of the older texts are more my favorite. So the one I talked about earlier with Marcus Manilius, um, the Astronomica, that book is a little bit older than this one, um, but this one is still on par when it comes to. But Astronomica is still like my favorite. But and then I like to incorporate. My friend Taylor got this book for me, and it's the only astrology book you'll ever need. And it actually, you can do, if you're into chart reading, a full chart reading with this book, because it has the planets in any house, the planets in any sign, Sun, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, Neptune, Saturn. However, it doesn't have Rahu and Ketu, because Rahu and Ketu are more of a Vedic or Indian. With the 27 nakshatras, they had Rahu and Ketu, which is still in Western astrology, but they just call them the North and South Node. But a lot of the mythology and the meaning and like the deeper spiritual contexts of what that really means for the individual kind of gets lost in Western astrology. It gets a little bit sugar-coated too much. Um, that's why I like the Rahu Ketu and those Nakshatra books I showed you. But these ones are still really good, because it goes through all the 12 for any sign placement, even including the house. So you can do pretty much a full chart reading with this book, like in less than 20-30 minutes. Like, I mean, for a basic overview, because each part has like its own little segment of information. If you correlate those all together, you could do kind of a overall chart reading. Basic, but still an overall chart reading, which is pretty impressive to have in such a small book like that. Right. And then I wanted to end on note of these is the Upanishads, which I know a lot of people will be like, well, that's not astrology, okay? That's like a religious book. But the nakshatras came from the Vedas. And because the nakshatras I found to be so precise, I really got into Vedic teachings, and the Upanishads are one of my favorite books of all the Vedic texts. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita is good, and I like it, but this one is more tranquil, and I find that it goes a little more into the spiritual side of matter. So, highly recommend this. I've in previous videos mentioned it, and if you do a Google search for that name, the Upanishads, there's a woman who read this whole book, and I have it as an audio on my phone, and I listen to it like all the time. So, highly recommend this if anyone's interested. And it still does go into details. Like, I did a video about higher and lower learning, and I talked about the path of the sun and the moon. Well, it talked about that, the path of the sun and the moon, in this book. So, about reincarnation and the cycles in which we come back to Earth. And then this one, I found this at a used bookstore, and it's the Prima Rasi Siddhanta, the philosophy of divine love. And it's written by a guru, a sage, a master. He was actually given the title of like, it was in another language, so it's hard for me to remember, but like best teacher. Like he really tried in this life to teach love and joy and through spiritual teachings. And this book is simply amazing. I haven't read the whole thing, sorry for that, but I have read some of it, read up to there. I have the page as a divider. But this book goes a lot into the Vedic teachings, but really summarizes them through his own interpretations, which everyone is going to have their own interpretation of sacred scriptures. And that's why it's good to, study a variety of different people's viewpoints on those scriptures, because then you can like combine and amalgamate them into a more all-encompassed perspective, which has more knowledge base to justify opinions and perspectives that you hold if they are further validated. And yeah, he's so kind and loving. And this book goes really into detail of talking about pain and joy in our life and the karmic dues in which we often have to pay, which result in either pain or joy. And a really key principle that the book talks about is the difference between pleasure and joy. And pleasure is just like materialistic drugs and alcohol and sex and things that are stimulating to the eye that aren't really deeper. Whereas joy, like true joy, is if you've had um, an experience through love or compassion or humor, and we're just thinking of that memory brings the joy. That's really what true happiness is. Anything that, because that isn't dependent, like you can bring in those thoughts whenever you want. They are transcendatory through time, where they don't exist in just one, like yes, the memory does, but you can bring in that memory whenever you'd like. And if it's something that's in the physical material world that you're just looking forward to in the future, then you can know that that's kind of more leaning towards pleasure, which is um, kama, which is like lower sexual desires, which is acceptable and it's not considered evil or from Satan or bad. It's just considered a part of nature. But that if you, it says that, the human spirit is like wild horses that need to be tamed. And you can't just let them run free willy-nilly. Like that means to have thought or control over your thoughts and actions, because you can't just let them go astray and just, like wild horses. They need to be trained. So, this was the last book on the list. And yeah, please give this a thumbs up. And if it's your first time watching this, hit the subscribe button below and leave me some feedback. Let me know what you think about any of those books and what you think about astrology and like why you are into astrology. Like for personally me, I really like it because it can show understanding of how other people think, and it helps me to understand how I think. And I like that because I find it gives clarity in understanding that we all think differently and that that's okay. So, yeah. Mwah. And I'll see you in future videos. Bye for now.